Lily had always imagined the moment she would meet her children for the first time. She had pictured the overwhelming joy, the tears of happiness, the way Andrew would squeeze her hand as they looked down at their newborns together. But nothing could have prepared her for what actually happened, the way the air left the room, the way Andrew's fingers slipped from hers, the way his face twisted in disbelief as he took a step back. "These aren't my kids," he said, his voice cold, final. And then he walked out. Lily and Andrew Harris had a life that many would envy. They met in college, drawn to each other instantly, and from the very beginning, it felt like they were meant to be. Both of them were blonde, with striking blue eyes, and people often joked that their future children would look like little angels. They got married right after graduation, eager to start their life together. Everything seemed perfect. Andrew had a promising career in finance, and Lily was pursuing her passion for interior design. They moved into a beautiful house in a quiet neighborhood, and from the outside, their life looked like a picture of domestic bliss. For a long time, they focused on building their future, traveling, spending time with friends, and simply enjoying being young and in love. But as the years passed, they both knew what was missing. They wanted to start a family. Lily had always dreamed of becoming a mother, and Andrew was excited at the thought of having children of his own. They talked about names, imagined what their kids would be like, and even started preparing a nursery before Lily was even pregnant. When she finally saw the 2 pink lines on the pregnancy test, she could hardly believe it. She ran to Andrew, holding the test with shaking hands, and the moment he realized what it meant, he lifted her off the ground and spun her around, laughing. They were overjoyed, and that joy only grew when they went in for their first ultrasound. At first, everything seemed normal. The doctor smiled as she moved the ultrasound wand over Lily's belly, pointing out the tiny heartbeat. But then, her expression changed slightly, and she adjusted the screen. Lily and Andrew exchanged a nervous glance. "Is something wrong?" Andrew asked, gripping Lily's hand a little tighter. The doctor chuckled. "Not at all. But I hope you're ready for some big news." Lily's heart raced. "What do you mean?" "You're not having just one baby," the doctor said with a smile. "You're having triplets." For a moment, there was complete silence. Lily's mind struggled to process the words, and Andrew sat completely still, his mouth slightly open. Then, suddenly, he burst out laughing in disbelief. "Triplets? Are you serious?" The doctor nodded. "Very serious. 3 healthy little ones growing right here." Lily felt a rush of emotions all at once: shock, excitement, fear, and overwhelming love. She squeezed Andrew's hand, and when she turned to him, she saw tears in his eyes. "We're going to have 3 babies," he whispered, as if saying it out loud would help him believe it. "Lily, this is amazing." From that moment on, their excitement tripled along with their growing family. Andrew threw himself into preparations, researching everything he could about raising triplets. He insisted on setting up the nursery himself, painting the walls a soft shade of green and assembling 3 identical cribs. He talked to Lily's belly every night, telling their unborn children how much he already loved them. Lily was exhausted, but she loved seeing him so happy. She had always known Andrew would be a wonderful father, but seeing his devotion firsthand made her love him even more. They joked about how chaotic their lives were about to become, but neither of them had any doubts. They were ready. They were in this together. As the months passed and Lily's belly grew, Andrew became even more protective, fussing over her every move. He attended every doctor's appointment, read every book about parenting, and made sure she had everything she needed. Friends and family showered them with support, throwing a huge baby shower where they received everything from tiny onesies to a triple stroller. Everyone admired how perfect they looked together, how lucky these babies would be to have such loving parents. On the night before Lily's scheduled delivery, Andrew lay beside her in bed, his hand resting gently on her belly. "Tomorrow, we meet them," he whispered, his voice filled with wonder. 3 little versions of us. Lily smiled, feeling the tiny kicks beneath his hand. I can't wait, she said softly. I love them already. Neither of them could have imagined that within 24 hours, their perfect world would shatter. The day of the delivery arrived faster than Lily expected. The morning was filled with excitement and nervous anticipation as Andrew helped her pack the last of her things and loaded them into the car. He kept reassuring her the entire way to the hospital, his hand firmly wrapped around hers, promising that everything would be fine. Though she knew triplet births carried more risks, she felt safe knowing that he was by her side. Once they arrived at the hospital, the nurses quickly prepped her for the C-section. The room was bright and sterile, filled with a team of doctors and medical staff, all moving with calm precision. Andrew was dressed in scrubs, sitting beside her, stroking her hair as they waited. You're incredible, you know that, he whispered, kissing her forehead. We're about to meet our 3 little miracles. Despite her nerves, his voice comforted her. She gave him a tired smile, and before she knew it, the procedure began. The doctors worked quickly, and within minutes, the first cry filled the room. Then another. And another. 3 perfect babies, their tiny voices blending together in a chorus of life. Lily felt overwhelmed with emotion as she heard their cries. Tears streamed down her face as she turned her head toward Andrew, expecting to see him crying too, just as overjoyed as she was. But instead, she saw something else entirely. His face was frozen. His eyes, wide with shock, were locked onto something across the room. His breathing was uneven, his hands trembling against the edge of the surgical table. Lily frowned, confused. Andrew, she murmured weakly, her voice barely above a whisper. But he didn't answer. The nurses were bustling around, carefully cleaning and wrapping the newborns before bringing them closer. Lily turned her head to see what had paralyzed her husband, and that was when she saw them for the first time. 3 tiny boys. Their features were delicate, their bodies small and perfect, but their skin was dark. Significantly darker than either hers or Andrew's. Lily blinked, trying to process what she was seeing. A rush of emotions flooded her all at once, confusion, disbelief, and then something deeper. Something colder. Andrew took a step back. His chair scraped against the floor as he stood abruptly, shaking his head. His face had gone pale, his jaw clenched so tightly that his cheekbones stood out sharply. No, he muttered under his breath, his voice barely audible. Lily's heart pounded. Andrew, what? No. His voice was louder this time, his panic rising. What the hell is this? The room seemed to freeze. The nurses hesitated, exchanging glances. The doctor looked up from his work, his brows slightly furrowed, as if trying to assess the situation. But Andrew wasn't waiting for answers. He was already stepping away, shaking his head in disbelief. Lily's body was still numb from the anesthesia, but a different kind of numbness was settling over her now. A sharp, terrifying realization. He thought she had cheated. She could see it in his eyes, in the way he refused to even look at her. The betrayal on his face, the fury barely held back behind his clenched teeth, it was like a blade through her chest. Andrew, please, she croaked, her throat raw, her voice weak. This isn't. But he was already backing toward the door. The nurse holding one of the babies hesitated before stepping closer. Would you like to hold your son? She asked gently, unaware of the storm raging in the room. Andrew's face twisted into something ugly, anger, pain, disbelief. He let out a bitter, humorless laugh. Those are not my sons, he said through gritted teeth, his voice dripping with venom. I don't know whose kids those are, but they're not mine. Lily felt like the air had been punched out of her lungs. The nurses stood frozen, stunned by his words. He turned to look at her one last time. His expression was unreadable now, no longer just anger, but something deeper, something final. Then, without another word, he walked out the door. Lily felt the sob rise in her throat before she could stop it. The nurse beside her placed a comforting hand on her shoulder, but it did nothing to ease the pain tearing through her. Her body had just given life to 3 perfect children, yet at that moment, she had never felt so completely and utterly abandoned. Lily lay in the hospital bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling like the entire world had collapsed around her. The sounds of the hospital faded into the background, the soft beeping of monitors, the muffled voices of nurses, the occasional cry of a newborn somewhere down the hall. None of it felt real. She had just given birth to 3 beautiful babies, yet all she could feel was an unbearable emptiness inside her chest. Andrew was gone. He had walked away without even holding them. Without looking back. She turned her head slowly, her body still weak from the surgery, and saw the nurse standing beside her, gently rocking one of the babies in her arms. The other 2 lay in small hospital bassinets, bundled in soft blankets, their tiny chests rising and falling with each peaceful breath. They were perfect. She should have been overwhelmed with love, with joy, but all she felt was devastation. She swallowed hard, her throat burning. "Can I hold them?" Her voice was barely above a whisper, raw from exhaustion and from the pain that wasn't just physical. The nurse smiled softly and nodded. "Of course." Carefully, she placed one of the babies in Lily's arms. He was so small, so warm, his tiny fingers curling slightly as he settled against her. The weight of him against her chest sent a fresh wave of emotion crashing over her, and before she could stop herself, tears spilled down her cheeks. "I don't understand," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Why would he just leave?" The nurse hesitated, as if searching for the right words. "Sometimes, people react in ways we don't expect when they're scared. But that doesn't mean you're alone." Lily wanted to believe that. She wanted to believe that Andrew would come back, that he just needed time, that this was all some horrible misunderstanding. But the look on his face when he had walked out, the sheer certainty in his voice when he said those awful words, those were not the actions of a man who planned to return. A soft knock on the door pulled her from her thoughts. She turned her head just as a nurse stepped inside, holding an envelope in her hand. "Mrs. Harris," the nurse said gently. Lily felt a strange sense of dread crawl up her spine. "Yes?" The nurse hesitated before walking forward and handing her the envelope. "Your husband left this at the front desk before he left the hospital." Lily's hands trembled as she reached for it. It was thin, weightless, but it felt heavier than anything she had ever held before. She knew what it was before she even opened it. Her breath hitched as she unfolded the papers inside. Divorce papers. A strangled sob escaped her lips. The nurse beside her reached out as if to offer comfort, but Lily barely noticed. Her vision blurred as she scanned the document, the words swimming in front of her. Asterisk, "You betrayed me." Asterisk. Asterisk, "I can't raise children that aren't mine." Asterisk. Asterisk, "Don't contact me." Asterisk. Every sentence was a knife to her heart. Her hands clenched the papers so tightly they crumpled. She wanted to scream. She wanted to throw something. But all she could do was sit there, holding her newborn son in one arm while clutching the papers in the other, trying to process the impossible truth: Andrew had abandoned them. Completely. Her mind raced through every moment of their marriage, every conversation, every time he had told her he loved her. Had it all meant nothing? How could he have given up on her so easily, on them so easily? Didn't he remember the nights they had spent dreaming about their future, about raising a family together? Hadn't he promised her that no matter what, they were a team? And yet, the moment something didn't make sense to him, the moment fear crept in, he had turned his back on her. She sucked in a shaky breath and looked down at the tiny face resting against her chest. His skin was warm, soft, his little mouth slightly open as he slept. Her child. Her son. She turned her head and looked at the other two bassinets. Her babies. They were here. They were real. They were innocent. And they needed her. Andrew had already made his choice. Now she had to make hers. Lily straightened her back, blinking away the tears. She wasn't going to beg him to come back. She wasn't going to waste her time chasing someone who had so easily thrown her away. She would sign those papers. And then she would prove, to herself, to her children, and to the world, that she didn't need him. Because she wasn't alone. She had them. And she would fight for them, no matter what it took. Lily had never felt exhaustion like this before. The kind that wasn't just physical but emotional, the kind that weighed down on her bones and made every breath feel heavier. Taking care of one newborn was hard enough, taking care of 3 on her own felt impossible. But she didn't have the luxury of giving up. The hospital stay had passed in a blur of sleepless nights, nurses helping her feed and change the babies, and the constant ache in her chest whenever she thought about Andrew. By the time she was discharged, she had signed the divorce papers without hesitation. There was no point in fighting for a man who had already decided to leave. Her parents had come to pick her up, their faces filled with concern as they helped her load the babies into the car. They hadn't said much about what happened. Her mother had pursed her lips in that way she did when she was angry but trying to stay calm, and her father had simply placed a hand on her shoulder and given her a nod, as if silently promising that she wasn't alone. The first few weeks at home were a test of endurance. Lily barely slept, barely ate. The babies needed her constantly, and just when she thought she had a moment to breathe, one of them would start crying, waking up the others. It was a cycle of feeding, changing, rocking, and repeating. The house that had once felt warm and full of love now felt too big, too empty, as if it was missing a piece that had been ripped away. Bills started piling up faster than she had expected. The hospital stay, the baby supplies, the rent, all of it weighed on her, a looming threat that she had no idea how to fight off. She had savings, but they were dwindling fast. Her maternity leave would only last so long, and she knew she couldn't afford to stay home for much longer. The thought of leaving her babies to go back to work made her stomach turn, but what choice did she have? One night, after a particularly long evening of soothing 3 fussy newborns, she sat on the couch, holding a warm bottle in one hand and scrolling through her bank account with the other. The numbers stared back at her, unforgiving. Panic curled in her stomach. She had been trying so hard to hold everything together, but the reality was undeniable: she needed help. Her hands shook as she picked up her phone and typed out a message. She had resisted asking for support for as long as she could, not wanting to seem weak, but pride wouldn't keep the lights on. Hey, Mom. I think I need to move back home for a while. The response came almost instantly. We were just waiting for you to ask. Come home. Relief and shame battled in her chest, but she didn't have time to dwell on either. The next morning, she packed up what she could, loaded the babies into the car with her father's help, and left the house that was supposed to have been their family home behind. Moving back in with her parents felt like a step backward, but she reminded herself that it was temporary. They set up a nursery for the babies in her childhood bedroom, and for the first time in weeks, she had real help. Her mother took the night shift with her sometimes, letting her get a few precious hours of sleep. Her father, who had never been one for words, started coming home earlier from work just to hold the babies while she took a break. For the first time since Andrew had left, she didn't feel completely alone. But even with their support, there were moments when the weight of everything crashed down on her. Late at night, when the house was quiet and she was rocking one of her sons back to sleep, she would feel the loneliness creep in. She would wonder if Andrew ever thought about them. If he ever regretted walking away. She told herself it didn't matter. Because even if he never came back, she had everything she needed right here. Lily had always believed in closure. She had thought that once she signed the divorce papers, packed up her life, and moved back in with her parents, she would finally be able to put Andrew behind her. She had convinced herself that anger and heartbreak would fade with time, that the constant ache in her chest would eventually become nothing more than a dull memory. But no matter how much she tried to move forward, there was one thing she couldn't let go of, the question that haunted her every night as she rocked her sons to sleep. Why? Why had their children been born with dark skin? Why had Andrew been so quick to assume the worst? Why had he walked away without a single doubt, without even considering that there could be another explanation? She needed answers. One afternoon, while the babies napped and her mother sat beside them, gently patting their backs, Lily sat at the kitchen table, her laptop open in front of her. She hesitated for a long moment before typing the words into the search bar, "Can a white couple have black children?" She wasn't sure what she was expecting, maybe confirmation that it was impossible, that Andrew had been right all along. But as she scrolled through articles and medical journals, her breath caught in her throat. It was possible. Rare, but scientifically explainable. Genetic traits didn't always follow a predictable pattern. Sometimes, recessive genes, ones hidden for generations, could suddenly express themselves in unexpected ways. A child could inherit DNA from distant ancestors, ones who might not even be remembered in the family's history. And in some cases, those hidden genes could lead to children who looked completely different from their parents. Lily sat back in her chair, her mind racing. This had to be the answer. But if that was true, then it meant one thing: Andrew must have had black ancestry somewhere in his family line. She needed proof. Her hands trembled as she navigated to a DNA testing site. She had heard about these tests before, people using them to trace their heritage, to discover long-lost relatives. She hadn't considered taking one herself, but now, it seemed like the only way to know for sure. By the time the test arrived in the mail, she had made up her mind. Carefully, she followed the instructions, swabbing the inside of her cheek before sealing the sample and sending it off. The waiting period was agony. Every day, she checked her email, half expecting the results to appear sooner than expected. She tried to focus on the babies, on finding a job, on adjusting to life as a single mother, but her mind kept drifting back to that test. 3 weeks later, the results came in. Her fingers shook as she clicked on the email. Her heart pounded as she scrolled through the report. Most of the information was exactly what she had expected: European ancestry, genetic markers that matched her parents. But then, near the bottom of the report, she found what she had been looking for. A section labeled "Inherited DNA from Other Parent" showed a breakdown of her son's genetic makeup. And there it was. A significant percentage of African ancestry. Lily inhaled sharply. The only way that could be possible was if Andrew himself carried those genes. Maybe it was from a distant ancestor, maybe a great-grandparent he had never known about, but the science was undeniable. Her children were his. She covered her mouth with her hand, emotions crashing over her all at once. Relief, vindication, even a sharp pang of anger. Andrew had abandoned them without ever considering that he might have been the reason their children looked different. He had destroyed their family over something that could have been explained with a simple test. For the first time since he left, she didn't just feel heartbroken. She felt furious. How could he have walked away so easily? How could he have refused to believe in her, in them? She had her answer now. But the question remained: what was she going to do with it? Lily stared at the DNA results for what felt like hours, her mind struggling to process the reality staring back at her. It was undeniable. Andrew had black ancestry, and that ancestry had surfaced in their children. The answer had been in his own blood all along. He had abandoned his family over a misunderstanding that could have been solved with a simple test, with patience, with trust. A wave of exhaustion swept over her, but it wasn't the kind that came from sleepless nights with newborns. It was deeper than that, an exhaustion that came from carrying the weight of betrayal, from knowing that no matter how much she had loved him, it hadn't been enough for him to even consider another explanation. She closed the laptop slowly, her hands trembling. She had her proof, but what now? What was she supposed to do with this information? Should she call him? Send him the results and demand an apology? Should she force him to face the truth? Her fingers hovered over her phone, tempted to type out a message, but she stopped herself. He had made his choice. He had walked away without hesitation. And maybe, just maybe, that told her everything she needed to know about the kind of man he really was. The next few days passed in a haze. She went through the motions of caring for her sons, feeding them, changing them, rocking them to sleep, but her mind was elsewhere. Her parents noticed the shift in her, but she didn't have the energy to explain. Then, one evening, while she was folding tiny onesies at the kitchen table, her mother sat down across from her, setting down a cup of tea. "You've been somewhere else this week," her mother said gently. Lily let out a slow breath. "I got a DNA test," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Her mother's eyes widened slightly, but she didn't interrupt. "It proves Andrew is their father," Lily continued. "He has black ancestry, probably from generations ago. That's why the boys look the way they do." She swallowed hard, her throat tightening. "He left us for nothing." Her mother exhaled, shaking her head. "Oh, sweetheart." Lily clenched her hands together, frustration bubbling beneath the surface. "I don't know if I should tell him. Part of me wants to throw it in his face, to make him see how wrong he was. But the other part," she hesitated, staring down at the tiny clothes in her lap. "The other part doesn't know if it even matters anymore." Her mother reached across the table, covering Lily's hand with her own. "You don't owe him anything, Lily. He didn't wait for the truth. He didn't fight for you, for them. He left, and that's on him." Lily nodded slowly. She knew her mother was right, but that didn't make it easier. A few nights later, as she rocked Liam in her arms, his small body warm against her chest, she found herself staring out the window, lost in thought. She imagined a different version of events, one where Andrew had stayed, where he had trusted her, where they had discovered the truth together. It hurt to think about how easily their family had been shattered. Then, as if the universe had sensed her thoughts, her phone buzzed on the nightstand. She frowned, shifting the baby slightly so she could reach for it. When she saw the name on the screen, her breath caught in her throat. "Andrew." She stared at the screen, her heart hammering in her chest. For a moment, she debated letting it go to voicemail, but then, against her better judgment, she swiped to answer. There was silence on the other end for a moment before his voice came through, hesitant and unsure. "Lily." It was the first time she had heard his voice in months, and despite everything, it still sent a shiver down her spine. She took a steadying breath. "What do you want, Andrew?" He trailed off, as if he didn't even know what to say. "I saw the test results." Her grip on the phone tightened. So he had received them. She had forgotten that the DNA testing site had automatically sent a notification to the other potential parent. "And," she asked, keeping her voice as even as possible. There was a long pause. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, almost broken. "I messed up." Lily closed her eyes for a moment, gripping the phone so tightly her knuckles ached. She had imagined this conversation so many times, had played out every possible scenario in her head. But hearing those words from him, "I messed up," didn't bring the satisfaction she had expected. They didn't erase the nights she had spent crying, the exhaustion of raising 3 babies alone, or the pain of knowing that the person she had once trusted most in the world had abandoned her without hesitation. She let the silence stretch between them, refusing to make this easier for him. Andrew finally spoke again, his voice lower, almost hesitant. "Lily. I don't even know what to say." Her jaw clenched. "That's a first," she said bitterly. A long exhale came through the line. "I deserve that." "You deserve a lot worse than that." She shifted Liam in her arms, pressing a soft kiss to his tiny forehead as he stirred in his sleep. "Why are you calling me, Andrew?" "I got the DNA results," he admitted, his voice heavy with something that almost sounded like shame. I had to take another test to be sure. I thought maybe it was a mistake, but," he trailed off, and Lily could practically hear the weight of realization settling over him. "But it wasn't a mistake," she finished for him. "No," he said quietly. "It wasn't." Lily let out a sharp breath, forcing herself to stay calm. "So let me get this straight. You saw our sons, decided they couldn't be yours, walked out on me without even considering the possibility that there could be another explanation, divorced me, left me to raise 3 babies on my own, and now that science has proven you wrong, you suddenly want to talk." Andrew didn't respond right away, and she almost laughed at the sheer audacity of it. "I was scared," he finally said, and there was an edge of something raw in his voice. "I know that's not an excuse, but it's the truth. I saw them, and all I could think was that the life I thought we had was a lie. That the person I trusted more than anyone had betrayed me. I was angry, and I let that anger control me." Lily shook her head, even though he couldn't see her. "You let fear control you," she corrected. "And instead of talking to me, instead of listening, you threw me away like I meant nothing." "I know," he admitted, and his voice cracked just slightly. "I know, Lily. And I will never forgive myself for it." She swallowed hard, forcing back the emotions rising in her throat. "So what do you want now? Forgiveness? Do you think you can just say you're sorry and make everything okay again?" "No," he said immediately. "I know I don't deserve that. I don't deserve anything from you." She wasn't sure if she believed him. There was another pause before he spoke again. I need to see them." Lily's grip on the phone tightened. The protectiveness in her chest flared up like fire, her maternal instincts screaming at her to keep her sons safe from the man who had abandoned them before they had even opened their eyes. "You lost that right when you walked away," she said coldly. "I know," he said again, and she hated the way his voice sounded, so broken, so different from the man she used to know. "But please, Lily. I need to fix this." She let out a shaky breath, glancing down at the baby in her arms. Liam, Noah, and James didn't know who their father was. They had never heard his voice, never felt his arms around them. He had left before they had even had the chance. And yet, deep down, she knew this wasn't just about her anymore. She had fought so hard for them, had done everything she could to give them love, stability, and security. But could she really deny them the chance to know their father if he was willing to fight for them now? She closed her eyes, her heart pounding. "I don't know if I can trust you." Andrew's voice was barely a whisper. "I don't expect you to. But please, Lily, let me try." She exhaled slowly, the weight of the past months pressing down on her. Every part of her wanted to say no, to hang up the phone and shut the door on him forever. But she wasn't just making this decision for herself. "I don't know if I'll ever forgive you," she admitted. "But they deserve to know the truth. So if you want a chance to be in their lives, you start from the bottom. You don't get to walk in and act like their father just because you suddenly decided you care." "I understand," he said quickly. She took another breath, steadying herself. "I'll think about it. But this is on my terms, Andrew. If you so much as hesitate, if you hurt them in any way, you will never see them again." I won't, he promised. Lily didn't say goodbye. She just hung up the phone, staring at the screen, her heart racing. She had no idea if she was making the right choice. But for the first time in a long time, she wasn't making it alone. Lily had spent months building a life without Andrew, convincing herself that she didn't need him, that their sons didn't need him. But now that he was back, at least in words, in apologies, in desperate pleas, she found herself facing a choice she never thought she would have to make. Did she let him in, or did she keep him at a distance, protecting herself and their children from further heartbreak? She didn't trust him. How could she? Trust had been shattered the moment he walked away, the moment he had looked at their newborn sons and decided they weren't his. She had spent sleepless nights holding them alone, feeding them alone, whispering promises of love and security into their tiny ears while battling the crushing loneliness his absence had left behind. But it wasn't about her anymore. It was about them. So, she made a decision. The first time Andrew saw his sons, it wasn't at her house. She refused to let him into the space she had fought so hard to make stable, to keep safe. Instead, they met at the park, a neutral place where she could leave at any moment if things didn't go well. She arrived early, her heart pounding, her stomach in knots as she lifted each baby out of the car and into the stroller. Her mother had offered to come with her, but Lily had refused. She needed to do this on her own. She spotted him the moment he arrived. He looked different. Thinner. Exhausted. His usual confidence had been stripped away, replaced by hesitation. He stood a few feet away, shifting awkwardly, his eyes locked on the stroller. Lily didn't speak first. She waited. After what felt like an eternity, he finally moved forward. His eyes were wide, almost disbelieving, as he took in the sight of them. 3 tiny faces, each one a perfect mix of her and him, though he had refused to see it before. "They're beautiful," he said, his voice hoarse. Lily swallowed hard. "I know." For a moment, he just stood there, as if he was afraid to get too close. Then he crouched down, hesitantly reaching out but stopping himself before making contact. He glanced up at her, waiting for permission. Lily nodded stiffly. He slowly touched one of their hands, Noah's, the baby closest to him. Noah blinked up at him with sleepy eyes, his tiny fingers wrapping around Andrew's hesitantly. Something in Andrew's face crumbled. "I'm so sorry," he whispered, but it wasn't directed at Lily. It was meant for them. She felt a lump rise in her throat. It wasn't enough, not yet. An apology wouldn't erase what he had done, wouldn't undo the months of abandonment. But for the first time, she saw real regret in his eyes, not just guilt but something deeper. He spent the next hour sitting with them, watching them, learning their names, their personalities. He didn't push, didn't try to act like the father he had never been. He listened. And that was something. After that, she let him come to their next doctor's appointment. Then, she let him come by once a week, slowly, carefully, always on her terms. He never forced anything, never demanded to be in their lives on his schedule. He followed her lead. And with time, the boys began to recognize him. They reached for him when he walked in. They giggled when he made silly faces. Lily still didn't trust him completely. She didn't know if she ever would. But she saw the effort, saw the way he showed up every time without fail. He was trying. One evening, after the boys had finally fallen asleep, she found him sitting on the couch, staring at an old photo of them on the coffee table. It was from before everything had fallen apart, before their world had cracked in two. He looked up at her, something unreadable in his expression. "I don't deserve another chance with you," he said quietly. "I know that." She didn't respond. "But I want to be their father," he continued. "I want to be someone they can rely on, someone they know will never leave them again. And if that's all I ever get, I'll be grateful for it." Lily exhaled slowly. "You'll never get another chance to walk away," she warned. "If you do, you don't come back." "I won't," he promised. And this time, she believed him. It wasn't the ending she had expected. It wasn't the perfect family she had once dreamed of. But it was real, and it was theirs. And for now, that was enough. This story isn't about a perfect, neatly wrapped happy ending. It's about pain, betrayal, and the devastating consequences of doubt. But more than that, it's about resilience. Lily had every reason to let her heartbreak define her. She was abandoned at the most vulnerable moment of her life, left to raise 3 children alone, and forced to rebuild from the ground up. But instead of letting Andrew's actions break her, she became stronger. She didn't chase him, didn't beg him to stay, she made the painful choice to move forward, even when it felt impossible. That's what real strength looks like. Andrew's return doesn't erase what he did. He will never get back the months he lost, the milestones he missed, or the trust he so easily shattered. But in the end, he chose to take responsibility. He didn't expect instant forgiveness. He didn't demand a place in their lives. He had to earn it. The beauty of this ending is its honesty. There's no grand romantic reconciliation, no perfect family magically restored. But there is something real: growth, accountability, and the hope that, despite everything, love can still exist in different forms. The past will always be a part of their story, but it doesn't have to define their future. And maybe that's enough.